I don't blink for dime novel dust, but a child's bite, 2 shots in white wind, and a house hiding breath under its floor that I'll follow, through blizzard and badges to a carved ring and a verdict called mercy. Come see if Arroyo Blanco can keep a family warm. White wind scoured Coyote Pass till the rails sang, and every breath bit like wire. Silas Creed rode in for a cracked breast collar and a sack of charcoal, nothing more. The freight spur lay quiet, 1 mule, 2 wagons, a stovepipe coughing weak heat. Men stamped their boots and sold things nobody ought to sell. Red Hank Lowry had a knit cap pulled low and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Two-toed Pike worked the tailgate of a sleigh where 3 women huddled in thin shawls. Rope burned their wrists. A little girl hid behind one skirt, eyes black as a night creek. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Surplus, Red Hank told a buyer with a laugh. Cheaper by the colt. The words hit Silas like gravel. He kept his hands low, palms open, breath fogging the rim of his scarf. He could smell wet hide, axle grease, and the sour sweetness of tallow smoke. Snow ticked on his hat brim. Somewhere a crow spoke once and shut up. Pike yanked at the nearest woman. She stumbled forward, clutching the child. "Spare my child," she cried, Spanish rough at the edges. "Por favor, mi niña." Silas said nothing. The old war lived behind his ribs like a coal. Glorieta Pass, broken horses, boys gone quiet with their eyes open. Some things you outlive, some things you carry. Pike bent, mean as winter, and pried the girl loose. She turned and bit him hard. He swore, raised his hand to strike. Silas moved. The colt cleared leather and bucked twice, dull thunder under snow. Red Hank folded sideways into a drift, the grin falling off him on the way down. Pike spun, knife flashing, then sat sudden with a red hole blooming through his coat. The stovepipe coughed again, then quiet, a kind that made your ears ring. Steam lifted off the pistol. Silas thumbed the hammer down and stepped to the sleigh. The woman's mouth trembled, but her eyes stayed on his hands. She had frost freckles on her lashes and blood on her knuckles where rope had chewed. The girl clung to her skirt, shaking like a rabbit. "Can you walk?" Silas asked. She swallowed. "Si." He cut the ropes with Pike's own knife. "Nay." "Isabel Morales." She put a palm on the child's hair. "Rosa." Boots scraped. A teamster backed away slow, face the color of old lard. Another ran for the telegraph shack. Smoke on the wind meant news already leaving the pass. Silas didn't look toward town. He could damn near see Sheriff Kincaid anyway. Frostbit ear, wolf-head pipe, the law held so tight it squeaked. "Nothing here to argue," old Nate Crow called from the switchback above, beard rattling in the gusts. He'd watched the whole thing, same as the crows. "Son, wind carries gun talk faster than a horse. You best ghost out." Silas lifted Isabel onto his bay and swung up behind, settling Rosa in his coat, so only her eyes showed. The child's breath warmed his chest through wool. She smelled of smoke, fear, and something clean beneath both, like rain that never came here. "We're leaving," he told Isabel. "Hold on." "Where?" Her voice was small against the storm. "Where no one asks." He nudged the bay into a trot. Hoofbeats thudded dull through drifted snow. The mule brayed behind them, long and stupid. A man shouted, thin in the wind. Silas didn't answer and didn't look back. They slid the grade in a spray of powder, crossed the siding, and hit the lower track where the drifts broke into hardpan and wind-fluted crust. The bay blew, eager to run. Silas kept him short. Speed breaks legs in country like this. He knew the cut through the junipers, the notch where the creek went black under ice, the long pitch down into timber. He could ride it blind, and had. Rosa's fingers found a tear in his coat and held. Isabel's breath came steady against his collar. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask. Snow whispered in the sage. The sky lowered like tin. At the last bend he glanced back. Red Hank lay half-covered, one mitten up as if to ward off weather that never listened. A telegraph pole creaked. 2 dots moved near the shack. Men with reasons to talk to law. Silas turned the bay's nose into the trees. "Senor," Isabel said, barely more than steam, "why you—" He kept his eyes on the notch ahead. "Ain't right," he said. It was all he had and all he needed. Old Nate's voice blew down after them. Just a scrap caught on the wind. "Keep your head low, Creed." They dropped into the junipers, the world going soft and green-black. Storm noise pinned to the ridge above like a bad sign. Snow fell thicker, teasing at his scarf and lashes, melting then stinging when the gusts came. He felt the land in his knees and in the old break in his left wrist. The bay found rock, then powder, then rock again. Behind them Coyote Pass gathered up its dead and its rumors. Ahead the valley of Arroyo Blanco lay white and mean, but it belonged to him, and it had a roof and a stove that didn't cough. He set his jaw and rode for it, carrying 3 hearts under one coat and the weight of what a man chooses when there's no one else to do it. They skirted the shoulder of the ridge until the trees thinned and the land tilted toward Mora Creek. The channel ran black under a skin of glass. Snow combed over it like a horse's mane. Silas reined in and let the bay blow. Steam rolled off the animal in white sheets. He listened. No iron on stone behind them, no men talking into scarves. Only wind and the faint creak of frozen branches. Rosa stirred. He felt her cough through the wool, small and dry. Isabel's hand came around him, not to hold him, but to steady the child. Her palm was cold, even through his coat. "We cross here," he said. Isabel's gaze climbed from the creek to his face and back. "It will break." "It might," he allowed. "So we don't make it mad." He swung down, boots biting through crust to rock. He took the axe lashed to his saddle and tapped along the edge, gentle, testing, the way you test a skittish colt. The ice spoke back in high notes and dull ones. He found the seam he knew, where the creek narrowed between 2 basalt teeth, where spring water kept a slow tongue moving under the shell. He chopped a slot for the front hooves, then led the bay step by step, letting him feel it, praising low when weight held. "Easy," Silas told the horse. "Easy, boy." Rosa's fingers dug into his collar when the ice groaned. Isabel didn't make a sound, but her arms slid tighter around the child. The bay's last step broke a crust pane and slushed water over the fetlocks. Then they were up the far bank, snow squeaking under iron. They climbed through juniper and piñon to a shoulder of open ground. The wind met them there, raw and clean, and carried a smell Silas knew better than his own. Fat smoke, wet wool, the tin whiff of old blood from a branding squeeze. Arroyo Blanco opened out below, a shallow bowl walled by dark timber, all of it wrapped now in hard white. "That's yours?" Isabel asked. "Mine enough to keep," he said. The ranch was small as such places go. One low house with stone ends and plank between, roof pitched steep for snow, a shed with a lean-to, a short run of corral fence sagging under drifts, a sheep shed boarded tight against the north wind. He saw what needed seeing in a glance. A loosened latch, a drift shoved against the east door, a stovepipe canted where the last blow had shifted it. He saw, too, the ewes' noses pushing steam into the dark and heard their soft questions. He swung down and lifted Rosa into Isabel's arms. The girl clung, then tucked her face in her mother's scarf. Silas slid his colt free, checked the cylinder, holstered it again with the same calm he used setting a kettle. "Inside," he said. Back room past the curtain. There's quilts. I'll bring water. Isabel hesitated on the stoop. He stepped aside, making a lane for her to choose it or refuse it. Snow hissed off his hat brim and popped on the stove lid when he opened the firebox. The house smelled of old coffee and tallow, wet hide that had dried by heat and left its ghost behind. He struck a match, nursed a curl of flame into kindling, then into split pignon. Heat began slow, like a fist uncurling. Rosa's eyes found the fire and widened. Isabel pulled the knit from her head. Black hair fell in wet ropes to her jaw. She stood there, not trusting the comfort, measuring it for teeth. Silas filled a kettle from the bucket he kept under a lid, the ice cap on its mouth needing one clean punch with his knuckles. He set the kettle to sing and put 3 mugs on the table. The table was scarred with knife cuts and burn rings. He could name most of them. "I see coffee," he said. "Sugar if you need it. There's beans and salt pork left from last night." He paused, met her eyes, because men ought to when they're saying what matters. "Knife's in the drawer. If it sits under your pillow, I won't take offense." Isabel's mouth moved, not quite a smile. She reached for the drawer and found the bone-handled blade because he'd told the truth. She slipped it into her skirt pocket, and it clicked there against a thimble. A small sound that meant a woman had once sown here and maybe would again. He went to the well. The yard gave up a thin sun while he swung the bucket. The rope rasped cold through his hands. He chipped a ring of ice from the curb with his axe and sent the bucket down. When he hauled, the wood groaned and a film of frost powdered off the rope onto his sleeves. He carried the water inside and poured some in a basin, set it near the hearth to take the chill off. Rosa watched him like a bird watches a hand that might hold. "Grain. You're safe here," he told the girl, awkward with the weight of saying anything to a child. "Long as you help with chores." Her brow pinched. Chores. "Feed that fire," Silas said, and pushed a split stick across the floor to the hearth with his boot. "Keeps a place alive, same as breath." Rosa slid from her mother's lap. She went to the stick and picked it up, both hands. The wood was almost as long as she was. She set the end on the coals and jumped back when sparks stepped out. Isabel started up, then settled when the flare fell into glow. Silas took his coat back on. "I'll stable the horse and see to the ewes," he said. "If somebody rides in, the root cellar hatch is under that rug. You don't owe me nothing but common sense." He went to the door. Isabel's voice stopped him, thin but steady. "What do you want of us, senor?" He kept his hand on the latch, the cold biting through the leather to the scar on his palm. "Nothing you don't want to give," he said. Snow swirled when he opened the door. The wind took his hat brim and tried to turn it into a wing. He pulled it down and crossed to the shed. The bay pushed his shoulder into Silas's chest, as if to say he'd done his part and had no interest in heroics. Silas rubbed the horse's neck until the hide quit twitching. He forked hay, checked the cinch for ice, shook powder from the saddle blanket, and hung it high where heat from the ewes would dry it. Out in the yard, the light went blue, the winter kind that means afternoon is already thinking about dark. Smoke rose straight from the stovepipe and didn't break till it hit the cold roof of sky. He stopped a second with his hand on the latch to feel that sight take hold of him. A house breathing. That's all a man ever asks. Back inside, Isabel had moved the table to brace the door. The knife lay near her cup, not hidden. Rosa sat close to the hearth, palms out, eyes half-lidded like a pup, chasing sleep it doesn't trust yet. Silas set a second armload of wood by the stove and shook snow off his coat over the threshold. He looked at the two of them, at the frost pinking their cheeks, at the tired set of Isabel's mouth, at the soot halo above the fire, and felt the old restlessness quiet, just a notch. "Keep the fire fed," he said, and left them with the warmth coming on and the mountains leaning close around the little house as if to keep it from the wind. Morning came thin and blue, the kind that makes smoke look like a ribbon cut from tin. The fire had held through the night, and Silas stepped into his boots, rolled his shoulders till the ache sat where it belonged, and lifted the rug by the door. The root cellar hatch swung easy. Good to know it still did. Rosa coughed, then quieted. Isabel had set a cup of coffee near the stove, black and mean. She didn't say she'd brewed it. He didn't say thanks. He drank and let it work down the cold places. Water, as said, we'll need plenty. Outside, the yard was crusted white. The snow had skinned over in the night a brittle shell that cracked underfoot. The well curb wore a lace rim of rime. Silas laid his gloves on the stone and took the iron bar he kept planted in a drift. He chipped at the round of ice that had sealed the mouth. The sound was a bell note, sharp, then dull as the frost let go. Rosa hovered at the threshold, blanket over her shoulders like a cape. Her breath made small ghosts. Isabel stood behind her, one hand on the girl's hair, the other hidden in her skirt where he guessed the bone-handled knife sat. "Come on," Silas said, gentler than he meant to. "You can help if you're steady." Rosa came barefoot in her mother's socks, toes lumped in wool. He put her hands on the rope with his fingers a brown shelf under hers. "Feel that weight? Don't fight it, let it talk." She looked up solemn. "It talks in its way." They lowered the bucket through from thirsty crust. It knocked once, twice, then went heavy and wet. He showed her how to brace a knee against the curb, to haul smooth, not yank. Her jaw set. The rope sang against the wood. Ice dust fell on their knuckles. When the bucket broke the light again, water shivered and smoked. Rosa smiled, small, sideways, like a secret. First he'd seen. "Strong," Silas murmured, "like your mama." Isabel didn't answer, but something eased in her shoulders. He set the bucket down by the door and sent Rosa inside with it, walking careful as a cat. Silas stayed out. A line of storm still hung like ragged cloth on the high ridge, but the air here felt settled for a spell. He checked the sheep shed, counted noses, ran a hand along the backs for burrs and cuts. The ewes pushed into him warm and oily with lanolin. He liked that smell. It meant work to do and animals depending. By mid-morning, old Nate Crow came up the draw on a dun mule that looked insulted by snow. Nate's beard had gathered icicles that chimed when he laughed, which he did at most things that weren't funny. He had a sled rope over one shoulder and a sack of split cedar on it. "Brought you some heat," he said, squinting at Silas's side yard. "Figure you'll need it more than me. Word's travelin'." Silas led him into the lee of the shed where the wind couldn't steal talk. "What word?" The telegrapher and Coyote banged the key like a woodpecker soon as your gun quit, echoing. "Kincaid knows there's blood on snow. He's got his pipe out and his temper in. Heard he poked around the spur, found Red Hank facing the sky with nothing to say. Posted the old wanted circulars on Hank and Pike just to feel smart." Nate spat in the snow where it froze like a bead. "World's tidy when the dead are wicked." "Dead were wicked," Silas said. "Sure," Nate allowed. "But Kincaid hates a man who cuts knots on his own. He'll call it murder till somebody with ink says rescue." Nate's eyes slid past Silas to the house. The door was cracked for air. A child laughed, one small burst, the sound of a match catching. The old trapper's face did a thing like thaw. "Who's the senora?" he asked quieter. "She said Isabel. Girls Rosa." Nate nodded once, then jerked his chin at the drift curling against the sheep shed. "That latch'll fail in a blow. See how the snow leans? Nords'll pry it like a fat man in a pie safe. Fix it now while the sky's thinking what to do." Silas fetched a brace and bit, a strip of rawhide, 2 square nails, and a length of scrap oak. He worked with his gloves off, fingers going wooden while he set the hinge deeper, snug the oak to take the strain, and bound the joint with wet rawhide that would shrink iron hard when it froze. Snow started to sift again, fine as salt. Isabel stood at the door with the kettle steam at her neck, watching him the way you watch a stranger build a bridge you might have to cross. You know weather, she said. Better than I know people, he said without looking up. The wind came down in a little tantrum, a squall no wider than the yard. It slapped his hat brim and sent stinging crystals under the band. He didn't stop. He set the last nail and pounded till the head buried flush. The squall slid off the roof and kept moving, a gray curtain 1 minute and gone the next. Isabel stayed put, hair lifting, eyes steady. When it passed, she said, "Gracias," plain, not soft, as if paying exact debt. He stood, flexing life back into his hands. "You'll want to keep the girl off the floor when the cold dives tonight. Lay down a rope mat if you can weave one. I got old sacks you can gut for fill." "I can sew," she said, as if challenging him to doubt it. "Good." Nate cleared his throat. "Sheriff'll likely ride the low road first, check the river ice, then swing this way. His deputy, Ruth Caldwell, the little sharp one. You remember her?" Silas did. Glorietta Pass, a scrap of canyon and smoke, a mess of boys. He didn't say it. "She owes you," Nate went on. "I seen how she looked when your name came up last fall. Not fond, like a dime novel, like a woman who ain't forgot being alive by a hair. Might be your luck rides a woman's memory this time." Silas picked up his tools. "Luck's for dice," he said. "We'll use what we can hold." Nate tied down the cedar on the porch. He pulled some flask, took a nip, handed it over. The whiskey burned clean. Silas handed it back. Nate tapped the well curb with his boot. "You let that little one haul water?" "Some." "Good," Nate said. "Place takes to folks who take to it. Same as horses." When Nate left, the mule wore a white ruff on its mane, offended as before. Silas watched them go until they were no more than a bump moving through sage. He carried the brace and nails inside. Isabel had pulled the table away from the door and set it square again. A scrap of sackcloth lay on her lap, with stitches neat and small, biting along one edge. Rosa lay on the bedroll by the stove, lids heavy, cheeks high with a little heat that wasn't fever. The child's eyes flicked to him, then to the door as if measuring his comings and goings against the shape of safety. He set the tools by the hearth. "Fence line sagged south of the corral," he said. "I'll tighten wire before dark." Isabel looked at his hands, raw where the cold had chewed. "You eat first," she said, and slid a tin plate toward him, with beans and a slice of pork crisped at the fat. The knife in her pocket clicked when she shifted. A small truth still there and nobody minding. He ate standing, as he often did, fork scraping the plate's scars. Outside the light leaned. Somewhere up the valley a crow spoke twice. The day would close quick and hard. He pulled on his coat again and took a come-along and a coil of wire. Isabel watched him to the door. "If men come," she said, "I can lie." He nodded once. "Don't lie more than you have to. Folks remember fancy stories." She thought on that. "Simple, then." "Simple holds," he said, and stepped into the bite of afternoon to mend what could be mended before weather and law took their turns. By dusk the wind had a bite like brass. Silas came off the south fence with wire cuts burning his fingers through the cloth. The sky pressed low, the color of old pewter. Snow sifted fine as flour. He stamped his boots on the stoop and felt the house's heat come up to meet him when he pushed inside. Rosa was curled by the stove, cheeks high, eyes shiny, in a way that wasn't right. The cough came from low in her chest now, wet, stubborn, the kind that drags breath like a sled. Isabel had rubbed sheep tallow into cloth. and bound the girl's ribs snug, a poor woman's remedy that at least kept a little warmth where it mattered. Steam rose from a pan where onion and water hissed. The room smelled of smoke, fat, and sweet, sharp medicine that wasn't medicine. Isabel looked up. She didn't waste words. "Escucha," she said, and laid a palm above Rosa's heart. He listened. Under the rasp he heard a whistle like wind under a door. He didn't have to say it. Isabel saw it on his face. "Doc July," she said. He nodded. "Los Trampa." "The sheriff," she said. "Kincaid," he answered. The name was a stone in his mouth. Rosa coughed again, the little body racking, then limp. Isabel held the girl through it, murmuring nothing, words in Spanish, a rhythm more than a prayer. When it passed, she tucked the blanket and blew hair off Rosa's damp forehead. Her own hands shook, not with fear, not exactly, but with the cost of holding on. Silas moved to the table. He pulled a scrap of brown paper from under a flour sack and a stub of charcoal from the mantel. He sketched fast. The bay path out the back gate, the low draw that cut the wind, the notch through Peñon, the way the creek curved under ice. He marked the root cellar under the rug with a square and the spare hatch under the sheep shed with a cross. "If I'm late," he said, "you take her down there. Keep the lamp low. Feed the stove clean, piñon and cedar, no green wood. Black smoke brings men like a bell brings dogs." Isabel watched his hand move. "If you are not late," she asked, "I'll bring quinine, laudanum, and a wool layer to keep her chest warm." He kept his tone flat. Promises break easy in bad weather. She touched the map with one finger, as if testing paint that might smear. "You think he waits for you. Kincaid waits for everybody, sooner or later." He folded the paper and slid it under the salt box where she could find it quick and nobody else would think to look. He tightened the string on his long coat, checked the colt, then checked it again, even though his fingers knew the weight by heart. Rosa stirred. "Señor," she whispered, voice thin as a reed, "will you be back with sweet candy like in town?" He crouched until his knees popped. He wasn't good at talk with children, but he could put his hands where it counted. He set his palm light on her bound ribs. "I'll be back with what makes that cough loosen," he said. "Candy, if the doc's got any left from Christmas." Rosa's mouth tried at a smile and didn't quite make it. Her eyes slid shut. Isabel poured coffee so black it looked like a hole in the tin. She pushed it across. "You will go at dawn," she said, not asking. "Dawn," he agreed. "Storm will be mean tonight, but she'll ease a hair at first light. I'll cut behind the freight spur. Less eyes if anybody's watching." "You will be seen," she said. He wrapped his hands around the mug and let the heat bite. "I might," he said, "but the girl won't last 2 more nights on onion steam." Isabel looked at Rosa, then back to him. Whatever she'd wanted to say dried up. She nodded once, slow. "Entonces," she said. "So then." He found clean socks, a dry scarf, the last pair of wool mitts that weren't worn through. He dropped 4 cartridges in his pocket and tied down the holster so it wouldn't swing. He oiled the bay's bit and set a fresh loop of rawhide on the latigo. He laid saddlebags open on the chair, like mouths waiting. The wind pressed its shoulder to the walls. The stove ticked as it worked. Isabel peeled onions with the quick economy of a camp cook, eyes shining from more than the knife work. She wrapped Rosa tighter, changed the cloth when it cooled. Once she reached for the kettle and fumbled. He was there with his hand under hers, steadying it before it spilled. Their fingers touched, lanolin, ash, cold ground into the lines of both. She didn't pull away. "Silas," she said, his name fitting in her mouth as if she'd been practicing when he wasn't looking. "If you go, you may not come back." He set the kettle down. He looked at her full on, because a man ought to when a woman says the truth. "Reckon I may not," he said, "but I've left before for less. She drew a long breath, then another. "If you do not return by sundown," she said, "we run south. I can reach cousins in Taos, maybe, old roads." She lifted her chin. "I will not leave you for the sheriff." He almost smiled. "You leave me for the girl," he said. "That's the only way a place like this makes sense." Something eased between them, not trust, not yet, but the feel of a door unlatched. They slept in shifts. He took the chair with his coat over him and boots on, hat over his eyes, the Colt near his knee. He woke to the rattle of sleet on the window skin and Rosa's cough, sawing at the dark, then softening. He rose and fed the stove with pinion, each split set careful, each flame coached like a colt. Toward morning the world went quiet, in that way storms do when they've thrown their weight and need a breath. The cold got clean. He stood, shrugged into the coat, and looped his scarf. Isabel was already up, hair braided, eyes flat with lack of sleep. She tied a bit of red thread around his wrist. It looked foolish on a man his size. It also felt like something made against the empty places. "For suerte," she said. "Don't put all your faith in string," he said, but he didn't take it off. He bent to the bedroll. "Rosa," he said. Her eyes opened slow. He touched his hat brim to her like she was a ladyess at church. "Keep the fire fed," he told her. "I will," she whispered. He went out into a morning that hadn't made up its mind about being light. The yard creaked under the cold. His breath built a small cloud that hung and then tore. He saddled in a hurry that wasn't sloppy, cinch tugged twice, breast collar set, shoes tapped for ice. The bay nickered once, then stood like he understood. From the porch, Isabel watched, shawl clutched, the knife still in her skirt pocket, because truth doesn't change with the weather. He swung up, felt the leather answer, put his heels in just enough to start. "Sila," she called, voice no higher than the eaves. "Vuelve." He touched the red thread. "I'll try," he said. He turned the bay toward the low draw where the wind went lazy and the snow drifted kinder. Behind him, the stovepipe drew clean, no black in it. The door stood tight. A thin curl of steam showed at the window, where onion and water kept on hissing. Tracks filled as soon as he made them. That was good. Let the country cover for him. He rode for Las Trampas, for Doc July's cluttered room, for a bottle with a label that might buy a child 2 more winters, and then some. He rode into the white, where the law waited, and the town and the kind of choice a man makes, because somebody small is breathing hard, in a room he can find again by smell alone. Las Trampas wore its cold like armor. The boardwalks had a shine to them, and the pump on the square stuck twice before giving water. Silas came in by the freight spur, hat low, coat turned up, snow packed into the seams of his boots. He tied off in the alley behind the barber and slipped through the back lot where the drifts were churned by mules. Doc July Avery kept rooms over the cobblers. The stair treads were worn hollow by worry. Silas took them 2 at a time and knocked once. Inside, glass clicked and paper rustled. "Doors on the catch," the doc called. His voice had the rasp of a man who'd seen too many winters and liked none of them. The room smelled of carbolic, lamp oil, and old tobacco. Bottles lined a shelf, like soldiers on bad rations. Doc July was big through the shoulders and narrow through the hips. His hands shook when he set a blue bottle aside, but his eyes didn't. "Creed," he said, as if the name were a weather report. "What's broke?" "A child," Silas said. 6, fever, cough deep, needs quinine, laudanum for the choke, a wool layer to keep heat where it does good." Doc's gaze clicked through the window and back. "Kincaid's in town. He smells like cold iron and a wolf pipe. You aiming to dance?" "I'm aiming to buy medicine." Doc lifted a ledger, damp from the room's breath, and dipped his pen. "Name," he said. Silas let the pause be what it was, then gave it. The nib scratched. SSILASCREED. There was a comfort to being written down. It meant a thing happened and the world had to carry it. Doc turned, found 2 small brown bottles, and thunked them on the table. Quinine, laudanum, 2 spoons of quinine in hot water 3 times, if you can get her to choke it down. Laudanum by drops. You count 'em like nickels, you hear me? Don't make her quiet forever. He rummaged in a crate and threw a roll of gray wool on top. Front wrap. Tie it firm. Footsteps went by on the boardwalk, men talking into scarves. The telegraph key downstairs started clacking, a bright insect chatter. Urgent. Doc July's jaw moved like he was chewing a nail. Red Hank Lowry's name been tapped all morning, he said. Somebody finally pinned the old wanted bill to his carcass. Marshal Holloway's office asked to be kept informed. He pushed the bottles closer. That hangdog sheriff will call it murder because it's cleaner in his head. Law don't always run with sense in a storm. Silas counted out coin, more than fair, and left it on the ledger. The doc didn't argue. He only slid the money under the blotter like he'd hide a flame from wind. Go out the alley, the old man said. If you get tagged, bleed where it won't mark up my floor. Silas tucked the bottles deep in his coat, wrapped in a rag and the red thread on his wrist so they wouldn't clink. The wool roll he tied with a bootlace and slung across his back. He hit the stairs light and came to the alley mouth. She was there, with the badge and the hat brim low and the scarf up to her cheekbones. Deputy Ruth Caldwell. Smaller than he remembered, or maybe the winter made everyone look pared down. Her eyes met his, flinched, then steadied. Creed, she said, and the word carried a whole canyon with it. Smoke and noise, and a girl with her ears ringing, while a man she barely knew hauled her by the collar out of a bad crossfire years ago. Ruth, he said, you look worse. Her gaze dropped to the bulge in his coat. You here for trouble or out of it? Medicine for a kid? She had to push her breath through the scarf. Kincaid's circle's tight today. He heard about Coyote. He's got that pipe in now. His teeth? Like he means to bite the stem through. She shifted so her body blocked the view from the street. There's a drift in the livery yard, big enough to swallow a mule. Cut through it and past the tannery. Stay on the lee side of the warehouses. Obliged, he said. You still owe me, she said, voice dry. For what? For breathing, she said. Go. He went. The alley wind gnawed his ears and put needles in the seams of his gloves. He worked the long way, keeping to barrels and snow heaps, listening for the click of heels that meant law. He reached the tannery yard where hides hung stiff as iron doors. The smell could beat back a bear. He slit between frames and came out by the back rail of the warehouse row. A voice like a file on steel came from his left. Creed. He didn't turn. He was already moving when the first shot snapped the air where his shoulder had been a blink before. He hit the corner, shoved off it, and lunged for the gap between 2 sheds. The second shot took him crooked, a hot swipe along the hip that felt like getting flayed with a dull knife. He went down to a knee and kept going because a stopping is something you do later if you can afford it. The bottles thumped against his ribs and did not break. He blessed the thread like a fool. Hold up, damn you! Kincaid's voice, close now, the wolf-head pipe probably clamped in his teeth while he ran. Silas threw himself over a low fence, slid belly first into a drift, and let the snow take him. The cold bit to the bone so fast it blurred the pain. He wormed under the lip of a sleigh and lay still. Breath slowed, steam curling from the boards like smoke through a crack. Boots pounded past, 6, maybe 7 pairs. Men fanned into the yard, cussing in that careful way men do when the law is listening to itself. Blood, someone said. Here. Follow it, Kincaid snapped. He would too. The man loved a line. Silas pressed his hip into the drift till the cold bit the fire back. When the boots bled away into the street, he slid out like a fox from a cut bank and went the other way, over a stack of green wood, through a gap in a fence, down into a run where the wind died and the snow set quiet. He didn't run, not exactly. He moved with that mule stubborn pace a man can hold for a long peace. When you've been shot, running shakes things loose inside that you might wish kept. He reached the edge of town by the freight spur, where the track ran flat and the prairie took over. He put his hand under his coat. It came back red and shining, but not pouring. A crease then, he could live with that. He swung into the saddle with care and let the bay walk. Hooves made a hollow sound on packed snow. Behind him, Las Trampas went about its business of staying warm and telling stories into scarves. The telegraph key chattered somewhere. A saloon piano tried to be cheerful and failed. He didn't look back. He kept to the lee of haystacks and then willow thickets, took the line old Nate would have taken, and set his jaw against the bite of wind and the throb in his side. The bottles rode like a second heart. The wool roll bumped his spine. He pictured a small chest wrapped tight, breath easing out of its own bad habit. He let the bay have his head up the last slope, then pulled him short to listen. No iron on stone, no men, only the long scrape of wind on snow and the little sound the cold makes when it eats at a creek's edge. He turned toward Arroyo Blanco, leaving a red-stitched line that the storm began to lick away even as it formed. The valley held its breath. Snow had crusted over the day's prints so clean, a man could believe he'd dreamed them. Silas rode with his weight off the bad side and one hand inside his coat, palm over the bottles like they were a pulse. The bay threw steam and wanted the barn. He got it when the house showed through the blue, low and square and breathing smoke. Isabel had the door open before he hit the stoop. Her eyes went first to his face, then to the bend of his coat where the wool roll showed. She didn't ask. He didn't waste words. "Quinine," he said, and set the bottle on the table. "Laudanum, layer." Rosa's cough rattled the air in answer. Isabel tore the rag off the cork with her teeth, poured hot water into a cup, and shook 2 spoonfuls of bitter into it. She blew once, twice, then brought it to the girl's mouth. "Traga, mi amor," she said. "Swallow." Rosa gagged, then took it like a soldier. The smell of the quinine was like coins and bark. Isabel wrapped the gray wool snug around the little ribs, binding it flat and warm. Silas stood taking air through his teeth, pain licking up his side in the hot waves that didn't show on his face. When Isabel glanced at him, he shrugged. "Crease," he said. "I've had worse doors shut on me." "Sit," she said. And that was not a request. He sat. The room tightened around the three of them, the stove ticking, the kettle whispering, the white press of cold on the panes. For a fist of minutes there was nothing but the slow work of medicine and breath. Rosa's chest still fought, but the sound had a different edge now, less like a sawtooth, more like a rope sliding on a post. Her eyes drifted and opened and drifted again. Silas felt the thread on his wrist bite when he flexed his hand. He took it as a reminder and not a charm. The first bell came thin and far, a single chime lost in the timber, like a bird that forgot its season. Then another and another staggered closer, the bright jingle of harness, conchos, and sleigh rigging, and men who wanted the world to know they were coming in a line. With it came iron on frozen ground, the scuff of shod hooves, the low talk of riders bunching before a climb. Isabel's eyes found his. They didn't need words. He rose, slow, felt his leg complain, and went to the rug. The hatch lifted on a breath of cold earth. The smell was potatoes and old wood, the place under a place where heat never reached. "Go," he said. Isabel looked at the cup, Rosa had gone heavy and limp in that medicine makes small bodies look careless. "If I move her, she will cough," Isabel said. "Let her cough down there," he said. "It'll be our noise, not theirs." A shape broke loose from the timber above and came swinging down the slope like a piece of mountain that grew legs. Old Nate Crow on his dun, rope over one shoulder, a string of spare bells in his hand. He didn't look toward the house. He just cut across the open, yelling at nobody in particular, shook the bells like a peddler at a fair, and galloped for the pine brake east of the corral. His racket pitched into the trees and took up an echo. The riders on the rim answered by fanning out. Silas heard a badge voice flat as a board. "Kincaid. Flag the east. Watch the creek cut." Conchos jingled hard. A horse blew. Ruth's voice came in low and quick, the way a woman talks when she doesn't want the room to hear. He couldn't catch words, only the grain of it. The sound set his teeth against each other. Isabel slid an arm under Rosa's shoulders. The girl stirred, coughed twice, short, mean, then pressed her mouth shut like she could hold his sound in with her lips. Isabel got her to the hatch. Silas lifted the wool-wrapped bundle and passed her down like a sack of seed you don't dare drop. He felt the heat of the small body through the bit of wool from the gray. Isabel climbed after, knife on a string at her neck, lamp held low with her cloak over it to blind the light. Silas lowered the hatch to a crack. He pulled the rug back where it lived and set the table on top of it with one hand while the other held his side. He crossed to the sheep shed and slid the spare hatch up there as well, open to the dark, in case the first was found. Then he limped back into the house and stood a breath with both palms on the table, letting his face wash clean of the things it had just shown. The yard took on that silence that comes before men who call themselves law decide what the day will be. The stove popped, a flake of ash drifted, snow sizzled on the hearth where it had blown through some crack in the chinking. A boot heel hit the stoop, measured, then another. A knuckle rapped the door, polite as a banker. "House!" Kincaid's voice. He sounded like a man chewing cold nails. "Sheriff?" Silas lifted his hat off its peg and set it on the peg again. He wiped his hands on his pants as if he'd been mending something instead of hiding his life under a rug. He moved the laudanum to the shelf out of sight, left the coffee tin and 2 cups and the wool scrap in plain view. He took one breath and then another until the ache in his hip settled into one place. The knock came again, harder. The wolf head pipe would be in his teeth. Ruth would be a half step back and to the side, the way she always stood when she didn't want to look like she was where she was. Silas laid his palm flat on the cool of the door. He could feel through wood and winter 3 lives stacked. 2 under the floor, 1 on this side of trouble. He could feel the law like a weight on the porch boards. He could feel the thin thread at his wrist. He lifted the latch. "Evening, Sheriff," he said when the door swung, his voice steady as if bells hadn't just rung his name up a mountain. The wind shouldered in around Kincaid, full of frost and the smell of horse and the little brightness of brass. Ruth's eyes slid to the stove, to the cups, to the floor. Kincaid's fixed on Silas like a nail in a plank. "Evening," Kincaid said, and that was all. He stepped past the threshold without waiting to be asked. The bells out in the timber kept on their foolish ringing where old Nate drove them deeper, and the storm gathered itself again on the ridge as if it had decided it wasn't done with any of them. Kincaid brought the cold in with him. Frost pinned his right ear flat like a torn flag. The wolf-head pipe rode the corner of his mouth unlit, as if he chewed iron to keep from chewing men. Ruth Caldwell stood half a step behind, snow salt in her lashes, her hands open where a lawman's would have been closed. "Creed," Kincaid said, "you make noise up at Coyote Pass today?" Silas tipped his chin at the stove. "All the noise I've made is keeping this place from freezing." Kincaid's eyes crawled the room. 2 cups near the coffee tin, the wool strap he'd used to bind Rosa, a damp ring on the table where a kettle had been moved in a hurry. He tapped the sole of his boot on a low spot in the floor. The sound came back hollow, the kind a man who knows houses will always notice. "Mind if we take a look?" he asked, meaning he wouldn't mind at all. Silas stepped aside like a man with nothing to hide and too much to lose. Ruth drifted toward the hearth, hands out to the heat, gaze taking the room like a seamstress takes a hem, fast, precise, already making allowances. Outside, sleigh bells flashed thin and bright where Nate rattled them through the timber, the racket pulling men east like gossip. Kincaid walked the perimeter slow. He smelled of tobacco that hadn't been lit in an hour, and the tin reek of winter sweat in wool. He put 2 fingers on the curtain to the back cubby and lifted it. Bedding, a folded quilt, nothing that wasn't a rancher's business in hard weather. A cough rose under the floor, small, strangled, the kind of sound a mother tries with both hands to hold in and can't. Kincaid's head snapped toward the rug. Ruth moved first. She set her palm flat on the stovepipe and yelped soft. "Draw's poor," she said, shaking her fingers. "Hear it?" She knocked the iron with a knuckle. The pipe answered with a gusting hoot that mimicked the cough enough to sell the lie. Ruth met Silas's eyes over the rim of her scarf and didn't blink. Kincaid's boots scraped the rug anyway. He had that look a dog gets when it hits bone under snow. He bent to take the edge between 2 fingers. The back latch rattled. A woman's voice, sharp with cold and dusted with apology. "Senor Creed? Pardon, the sheep. One is out. Allah, at your fence." Kincaid straightened in a single hinge. Ruth turned. Silas moved like he was meant to. He took the back latch and pulled the door against wind. Isabel stood there with snow in her hair and her shawl crooked, collar loose at the throat like she'd tied it while running. Her cheeks were high with cold and something fierce. In her left hand she held the broken latigo he'd tossed aside yesterday. In her right, the bone-handled knife wore a loop of string like a necklace, hidden by the shawl, unless you knew where to look. "You're you," she said, breath fogging. "The small one with the torn ear. I put her back, but the latch—" She let the sentence hang, inviting a man who notices latches to go notice one. Kincaid's attention slid toward the yard as if pulled by wire. "Who are you?" "Isabel," she said, simple as salt. She pitched her accent thick enough to be heard and thin enough to be believed. "I wash for the camp sometimes. He pays in flour." She nodded past Silas, not looking into his eyes. "He is not my man." Ruth, bless her, made a small, disgusted sound at the door jamb like winter itself offended her. "Sheriff, your men'll freeze their lungs arguing with a gate. That drift stacking quick on the east." Out past the corner of the house a horse blew hard and stamped. Bells jangled, Nate still drawing ears the wrong way. Snow came harder, thickening into those ragged sheets that cut a man off from his own hand. Kincaid looked back at the rug, then at Isabel's open collar, the raw rope burns on her knuckles, the threadbare shawl. A lawman can read a ledger, a winter man reads fingers and fabric. "You seen anyone ride this way?" he asked her. Isabel didn't blink. "A man in a long coat at noon," she said, and picked a direction that wasn't theirs. "Toward the river. He rode like the wind paid him." Silas kept his face the way men do when they listen to weather, not words. Kincaid chewed the pipe stem. He had to choose between a drift that would eat his horses and a floor that might hide his quarry. The storm made his decision look like sense. He jerked his chin at Ruth. "We'll pull off 'fore we ice the string, post a writ. We come back when this quits trying to kill folks." Ruth nodded. "Aye." Kincaid set a folded paper on the table with 2 gloved fingers. The county seal looked cold even in the warm room. "Search writ," he said. "You're served. Next time we don't knock twice." Silas said, "You do what you have to." Kincaid gave the room one last slow peel with his eyes, then stepped into the weather like a man stepping into a fight he didn't pick. Ruth paused in the door. Her gaze fell to the red thread at Silas's wrist and then to the stove where heat shimmered. Her mouth bent in something that wasn't a smile. "Keep that drawer clean," she said. Storms turned smoke into lies. The door thudded shut. Their boots rang off the stoop, then dulled under snow. Harness cracked, bells flared and faded, hooves went hollow up the grade. Wind took back the yard. Silas didn't breathe until the last jingle shredded into timber. He lifted the table alone and slid the rug aside. The hatch swung. The air from below came up damp and root-sweet. Isabel's face rose first, eyes wide in the half-dark. Then Rosa, bundled in gray, mouth slack from laudanum, but breathing easier. He took the girl, set her on the bedroll close to the stove, and felt the sound in her chest change shape, a bad knot beginning to slip. Isabel came after, shawl falling, hair stuck to her temple where sweat had salted and frozen. She stared at the door, then at the writ on the table, then at Silas. "You lied good," he said. "You opened the other hatch," she answered. "I used what was there." Her voice shook and then found itself. "Ruth, is she as your friend?" "She's the kind that pays back what's owed," he said. "Sometimes that's better." Rosa coughed once, a smaller thing. Isabel knelt and laid a palm to the wool wrap, feeling the heat hold. The stove ticked like a watch. Outside, the storm leaned heavier on the roof, trying its best to make men fools. Silas picked up the writ and set it by the salt box under the folded map. "They'll come again," he said. Isabel's hand found the floor. Her fingers curled against the grain like roots taking to earth. "Entonces," she said, "we'll be ready." The storm shouldered the walls till the chinking ticked. Rosa slept heavy, lashes tacky with fever sweat, breath lifting the wool wrap in small, honest hills. The laudanum had her soft but not drowned. Isabel kept one finger under the child's nose, the way mothers do when they don't trust silence. "Your turn," she told Silas without looking up. He peeled the coat back. The crease on his hip had glued to the wool. When he tugged it free, the pain came bright and hot, then dulled down to something he could carry. Isabel set a pot to boil, poured whiskey in a tin, and burned the needle's eye in the lamp flame till it glowed. She didn't ask if he was ready. He braced his boots against the floor and let the chair take his weight. "This will hurt," she said. "Most good work does," he said. She cleaned the groove with steady strokes. The sting went through his teeth and set up house in his jaw. He kept his breath even and counted knots in the floorboard. Outside, a tree groaned under ice. Inside, the lamp made a small sun, and the stove breathed like a big dog. "Why didn't you give me up?" he asked, voice level to keep it from shaking. The needle paused in air, a bead of whiskey trembling off its point. "Because she laughs when you're near," Isabel said, and set the first stitch. He let the words sit where they landed. Thread tugged skin, a tidy pain. He could feel her breath when she leaned to bite the cut end clean. She worked quick, camp seam quick, seamstress true. When she finished, she painted the pink line with whiskey and blew on it till it quit shining. "You will limp," she said. "I limp already," he said, and found himself smiling at nothing. She wrapped him with a strip torn from a flour sack, rubbed in tallow so the cloth wouldn't cling. Her fingers were warm now, heat stolen from the kettle and the work. He watched her hands and thought of fences that hold, because someone took time with the staple and the grain. Rosa stirred. A cough tried to climb and didn't make it. Isabel went to her, laid a palm to the child's chest, then looked back at the bottle on the shelf. "2 drops more?" she asked. "1," Silas said. "We don't want to quiet what ought to wake." She nodded and counted aloud, "Uno," into the spoon, then thinned it with water and got it past Rosa's lips. without rousing the beast that lived under the girl's ribs. Silas stood, testing the wrap, and crossed to the corner where he kept what a place keeps, tools that owed him service and wood that still had one more use in it now. He took down the handle from a hoe he'd broken last fall, a length of applewood gone smooth from years of hands. With his Barlow, he shaved it to a ring blank, turning it slow while shavings curled like pale ribbon onto his knee. He bored the center with an awl, tapered it with the knife's spine, and worried the edges with a scrap of wool till they quit catching. Isabel watched, finally, head tipped like a bird. "Que haces?" "Making something that holds," he said. He measured the ring against his thumb knuckle, too loose, then against her smallest finger, with a squint and a guess, and the kind of math a man learns from rope. He worked a while longer and rubbed the applewood with tallow and a touch of coffee grounds to warm the color. When he was done, it looked like a little circle cut out of dusk. He didn't kneel, he didn't speech. He set it in her palm, wood against skin. "Plain," he said, "but it holds." The stove popped. Isabel looked from the ring to his face and back, the way a rider tests a bridge plank with one boot. Her mouth didn't know how to make any shape for a breath or a word. At last she folded the ring in a square of cloth and slid it into the pocket with the bone-handled knife. Not on her hand. Close, though, close counted. Outside, a wolf called once, then again farther off, the valley passing the sound hand to hand. The storm had blown itself honest. The roof quit creaking like it meant to leave. Heat settled in the boards. The house felt like a chest after a hard run, breath easing. Ruth's voice rode the wind a little far up the grade, calling men to turn their horses before they iced. Kincaid would mark his writ on whatever he could fix and come back with blue sky and a bad mood. That was a tomorrow problem. Isabel set the kettle aside and leaned back on her heels. Tired put shadows under her eyes. She glanced at the map by the salt box, then at the place where the rug covered the hatch. "You have lived alone long," she said. "Long enough to forget the right number of cups," he said, nodding at the two on the table. She almost smiled. "We will teach you." He sat again because sitting wasn't a weakness if work filled it. He set his bad hand on the table and drummed once, twice. "When the storm breaks, we'll move feed closer," he said. "Fence south line, check the chimney stays. Law will come after the blow, and I'd rather meet him with chores done." "Claro," she said. "Tomorrow is for law. Tonight is for breathing." Rosa roused and coughed, a small, clean sound. Isabel slid behind her, lifted the girl, and settled her against her own chest so the breathing could find a better path. The child sighed and burrowed, cheek to the wool. Her hand found the red thread on his wrist and patted it, half asleep. "For suerte," Isabel murmured, watching. "For whatever it is," Silas said. They sat that way while the lamp burned low. A man with a stitched hip and a woman with a ring in a pocket, a child between them, breathing like a bellows that had learned gentler work. Snow hissed and quieted on the panes. Somewhere a drift slumped from the sheepshed with a muffled thud. The world put itself back together in small, ordinary noises. "Sleep," Isabel said, but her eyes were on it, not the bed. "You first," he answered. She shook her head. "Mothers are last," she said, and pulled a blanket over Rosa's legs and part of her own. The other half she flicked his way without looking. He caught it and let it sit across his knees, like a question answered without trouble. The house held. The storm eased. The needlework in his side tightened and quit singing. When sleep came, it came the way good weather does, in winter. Carefully, and worth keeping. Winter loosened its teeth by inches. The icicles on the eaves thinned to clear knives and then to drip, 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 a slow counting you could rest your heart to. The creek under the cottonwoods found its voice again, laughing in the throat like a baby learning a sound. Lanolin and wet wool made the yard smell honest. Rosa's cough came in tidy barks now, then quit, and left her breathing like sleep means to be, deep, even, boring. "Better," Isabel said, palm on the little chest. Her other hand brushed the pocket where the square of cloth held the apple wood. "Not yet," her mouth said without saying. "Soon." Tracks showed on the ridge 2 days after the storm. 3 riders in a line, tidy as script. Silas watched from the sheep shed door with his hip letting him know the stitch job had been true. The middleman wore federal cut, hat brim like a straight edge, coat that hung square, U.S. Marshal Tate Holloway. He looked like a ledger that learned to ride. Kincaid came too, frostbite ear and all, pipe wolf head clamped unlit. Ruth rode a touch to his left, jaw set, eyes taking everything and telling nothing. They tied off neat and stepped into the yard like men who'd agreed ahead of time to be civil in front of a house. "Creed," Holloway said, a nod that was not unfriendly. "We'll do this quick." "Quick's good," Silas said. "I got fence wants minding." Inside, the stove threw a steady heat. Rosa sat with a slate and chalk, drawing crooked sheep while Isabel trimmed a tear off the end of a flour sack and made it square again. Holloway took the chair. Kincaid stood. Ruth stayed by the window. Holloway laid papers on the table and smoothed them with a flat palm. "Telegrams and circulars," he said. "Red Hank Lowry and 1 Pike, federal wanted for trafficking, assault, kidnapping across territorial lines. Charges stood before they got shot. That makes your day at Coyote start somewhere different than murder." Kincaid's mouth went thin. He tapped the pipe stem against his teeth, metal on tooth like a file. "Different starting place ain't the same as different end." "Truth," Holloway said, "so we line up what's true." He looked to Ruth. "Deputy Caldwell." Ruth drew breath like a swimmer. "I encountered Creed behind Doc July's," she said, plain. "He had medicine. I allowed him to leave. I signed to that." She pulled a folded page from her coat and put it under Holloway's hand, a sworn account in a tidy, stubborn hand that said she understood exactly what she owned now. Doc July came then, big shoulders in a city coat, ledger under his arm like a Bible. He smelled of carbolic and coffee and a little fear he didn't bother to hide. "Entry," he said, thunking the book down. "Quinine and laudanum, purchased, name on the line, time, 10:40 by my clock. I don't give a cuss for Kincaid's pipe. A child needed breathing." He set 2 brown bottles on the shelf by habit and realized they were already there in twin. He grunted, "Good." Kincaid folded his arms. "Plenty men buy medicine after a killing to dress the part. Plenty don't take a bullet running away instead of shooting their way clear," Doc said, bristled. "That crease on his hip is a front-to-back graze at a shallow angle. Running, you want me to draw you a picture? Draw me where the bullets fell," Kincaid said, stubborn out of principle now. "Brass don't lie." "Got some," a voice said from the door. Old Nate Crow tipped his hat and set a small cloth pouch on the table like he was paying church. "Picked 'em myself off the spur when the telegrapher went to tapping gossip. 2 from a Colt and 1 from Kincaid's own boys, judging by the bite on the rim. Snow'll take the rest to spring." He spread a rough map he'd sketched on butcher paper. Switchback, sleigh, stovepipe, bodies shown as tidy X's. Angles say Creed shot when Pike raised a blade at the girl. Hank caught his because he was reaching in. I seen it from the cut. Ain't pretty, but it's clean. Holloway listened the way a man listens to a story he expects to repeat under oath. He slid a finger along Nate's pencil marks, checked them against the weight of the brass in his palm, and nodded once, slow. "Line up true," he said. Kincaid's eyes went to Rosa, who was watching him solemn over her slate. She lifted the chalk sheet and showed it to him like a lawyer exhibits a knife. The little chest rose and fell under the gray wrap. Easy. Quinine had done its work. Kincaid's jaw worked, the pipe stem clicking. He spit a splinter of tobacco into his palm, looked at it like it had told him a secret, and wiped it on his coat. "Law don't care to encourage men cutting knots," he said. "Finally sounds. But I ain't blind to rope burn." He tipped his chin at Holloway. "You call it." Holloway put the brass back in the pouch and tied it neat. He laid his hand on the ledger, on Ruth's account, on Nate's paper, like stacking kindling right. "Self-defense in the act of rescue," he said. "No warrant stands." He pulled a final slip from his satchel, signed it with a pencil he sharpened with a pocket knife, and slid it across. "Filed and closed on my end. County can snarl if it wants, but I doubt it will." Kincaid took the slip, read it like a man reading a weather sign he doesn't like, but can't change, and tucked it inside his coat. He tapped the wolf pipe against his glove and put it away. "Law knows warmth when it must," he said, voice dry as the lee side of a barn. "Don't teach it bad habits." Ruth let out a breath so soft you'd miss it if you didn't live with storms. She looked at Isabel, at the brown hand still on the child, at the new quiet in the room, and something in her face went easier. "Keep that stove clear," she said, almost a joke now. Isabel's mouth twitched. "We will." Holloway stood. "One more thing," he said to Silas. "You keep yourself out of folks' headlines a while. Let the past forget your tracks." "I got fence," Silas said. "That'll keep me plenty out of print." They left as they'd come. Tidy, civil, the door closing without argument. Horse sounds faded up the grade. The drip from the eaves kept counting. The creek laughed. Rosa drew a second sheep and gave it longer legs. Silas petted at the table and put his palm on the woods where the writ had been yesterday. The place felt warm through and through. Isabel looked from him to the pocket where Applewood waited. "Soon," she said, and this time it sounded like tomorrow had already taken one step closer. Spring didn't come with trumpets, it came on soft feet, wetting the dirt under the snow, so the yard smelled like a cellar gone green. The creek talked louder, shouldering ice aside in plates that chimed against each other. Ewes dropped lambs with the insulted look sheep always wear about the hard parts of living. Rosa named each one wrong and right. Nibla, boots, tall girl, even when the ears said otherwise. Work said its own hymn. Silas packed the south fence tight. Staples bit true, wire hummed when he plucked it, a music he trusted more than most. The stitch in his hip settled into a complaint he could live with. He taught Rosa to ride double on the old roan mare, slow circles in the corral until slow looked like grace. "Heels down," he told her, tapping her boot with a finger. "Don't saw her mouth. Let her ask. You answer." Rosa tried not to grin and failed. "Si, Señor Silas." "Just Silas," he said, and felt how that sat. Isabel planted seed potatoes in the strip by the sheep shed, eyes set, facing sky like hope. She mended sacks neat as scripture and hung them in pairs so the breeze could read through. When she moved, the ring in her pocket thudded soft against cloth. A small heartbeat she kept to herself. Sometimes she touched it like a seamstress checks her work, in passing, but exact. Old Nate brought a letter one noon pinned in his hatband with a fishhook. He goose-stepped onto the stoop like a man delivering the Constitution and presented it between two fingers the way he'd offer a knife, handle first. "Marshall's hand," he said, "smells of pencil and patience." Silas wiped lanolin off his palms and broke the seal. The paper was brief. It used words like closure and jurisdiction and self-defense. It said what Holloway had said with his mouth, but now ink carried it where men forget their better selves. At the bottom was a signature that could swing a door. He set the letter on the table and let the room feel it. Isabel read by the turn of his face before she read the page. Rosa leaned in, nose over the county seal, body making the exact shape of curiosity and relief. "What does it say?" she asked, because a child wants the sound even if she's already read the truth in the air. "It says this house is just a house again," Silas answered, "and a fence is just a fence." Rosa nodded like a judge, then went to check on Nibla, as if law too might need water and hay. Quiet settled that wasn't silence so much as a thing done right. Isabel picked the letter up, traced the cut of the words with one finger, no flourish, no lies, and set it down as if a weight she had not allowed herself to name had stepped off her chest. That evening they ate beans that tasted like something besides duty, and a heel of bread that cracked in a way that promised more. The sun spilled out late and lazy, a gold thin enough to see through, and caught the lambs at play, all pins and leaps. Rosa laughed from the belly, the cough gone out of the sound. "Tomorrow," Isabel said, looking past the window to the cottonwoods where the creek fretted the bank. "We go there." "Why?" Rosa asked, already smiling. "To wash winter off our hands," Isabel said. They went at first light when the air had that blue that makes a man make promises. Silas rolled his pant legs and stood in the creek until his bones yelped. Rosa shrieked and splashed him like only the newly well dare insult. Isabel knelt and let water run over her wrists till the scars from rope went pale and then dark again. She smelled cottonwood, wet penny, green penny, and looked at the man watching the pass without really watching it. "Silas," she said. He turned, water ticking from his cuffs. She took the square of cloth from her pocket and unfolded it like a prayer flag in reverse. "Something you send back down to earth." The applewood circled her palm. The light put a warm color in it. No hand ever sanded. She held it a second, not as question. Questions had been asked in champ, cold rooms, and counted out in drops, but as answer. "If I wear this," she said, "you will stop staring at the pass so much." He looked up at the notch where storms stack and riders look small. He let it go by inches, the way a rope pays out when a good horse leans into it. "Reckon I will," he said. Isabel slid the ring onto the finger the world had taught her to save for vows. It fit like something made by someone who knows wood and hands and how much give life requires. The creek made its applause the only way it knew, and a robin tried out a sentence in the cottonwood and liked the sound enough to say it again. Rosa watched with the solemnity children grant things that might be magic. "Now we are a ranch," she declared, as if that were a kind of family, recognized by all laws worth obeying. "Now we are a ranch," Silas echoed, tasting the word that meant fence and roof and chores, and chosen people to carry them with. They walked back slow, boots making wet moons in the mud. Work met them at the yard with the cheerful rudeness of a lamb that forgot a gate. Silas lifted wire, Isabel shooed, Rosa laughed like a bell that knew it would be rung kind. The letter on the table lay under a flat stone, not to hide it, but to keep it from curling up like a leaf. It would live in a drawer with other scraps that told the truth. Doc July's ledger copy, Ruth's stubborn hand, a pencil map with a hatch marked under a rug. At dusk, Silas set fresh wood and watched the draw, not for riders, for smoke. He liked how it climbed clean and got out of their way. Isabel poured coffee and put a little sugar in Rosa's on account of spring. The ring caught the firelight and made a small sun on her knuckle. It wasn't much to look at if you were a man fond of weighing things by shine. It held, though. "Keep the fire fed," Silas told Rosa, a habit and a benediction. "I will," she said, and got up on her knees to set a split on the coals with a seriousness that made the world, for that moment, seem entirely repairable. Night came down without trouble. The pass wore blue instead of threat. A coyote trotted the fence line and decided not to test it tonight. In the bed under the eaves, Rosa breathed the way the land does when weather keeps its word. On the chair, Silas's hips sang a low, old tune, and then quieted. On the pillow, Isabel's hair smelled like cottonwood and smoke. A place doesn't turn holy because a paper says so. It turns holy because people stay and do the small right things again tomorrow. They did. And when the wind rattled the window just enough to make a woman think of empty roads and a man think of long guns and bad hands, they reached across the dark and found the living answer. Each had promised the other. Warm skin, steady breath, the weight of being chosen and choosing back. The West kept on being the West, big, careless, beautiful, rough. The house at Arroyo Blanco kept on being a house. It was enough. When the wind finally laid down, the ranch kept its small promises. Warm bread, clean smoke, chores that made sense. Silas stopped watching the pass. Isabel wore applewood. Rosa firm the fire like it mattered. Maybe that's all the West ever asked of us. Choose and keep choosing. If this story found you, drop a 0 if you'd have ridden on, or a 1 if you'd have stayed. And tell me why in a line or two. Tap subscribe so you don't miss the next trail. More quiet miracles, more hard choices, more warmth earned the long way.